That night, a single dance was enough for her world to begin to crumble. Hours later, she woke up in a strange bed, surrounded by luxury and silence, in the arms of a millionaire who claimed to have taken care of her. But she remembered nothing. If you like love and romance stories, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave your comment saying where you're listening from. The smell of incense and old wood permeated every corner of the house where Emma grew up, a modest two-story building on the outskirts of Cedar Springs, Georgia. The walls, yellowed by time, held echoes of whispered prayers and rehearsed sermons, while the dark, heavy furniture seemed to watch every movement of the 22-year-old woman who walked barefoot down the hallway, trying not to wake her father. Pastor Robert Johnson always slept with the Bible open on his chest, as if the sacred words could protect him from the nightmares that had visited him since his wife's death. Emma knew those nightmares well, because she had them too. Fragmented dreams, where a brown-haired woman with sad eyes whispered secrets she could never remember upon waking. That March dawn, Emma slid her fingers over the loose floorboard in her bedroom, feeling her heart quicken, as it always did when she touched her mother's hidden diaries. 3 notebooks with faded covers, filled with nervous handwriting and words that seemed to scream in silence. "There are things a daughter shouldn't know about her own mother," read one of the entries, "but there are truths that burn when they remain buried." What disturbed Emma most wasn't the words themselves, but the sensation that her mother had foreseen something, as if she knew her daughter would grow up suffocated between her father's expectations of purity and her own desires that she barely understood. "Virginity is more than chastity," she had written on one of the last pages. "It's armor against chaos, but every armor has its weak point." Emma closed the diary and put it away again, her breathing still irregular. At 22, she had never been kissed, never felt someone's intimate touch, never even allowed her own fingers to explore territories her father classified as the domain of sin. But lately, the dreams had become more frequent. Dreams where invisible hands traveled across her skin, where a male voice called her by a name that wasn't hers, where she surrendered to pleasures that made her wake up wet with sweat and guilt. At the university, studying psychology in a semi-remote program to avoid straying too far from home, Emma kept her distance from her classmates. She avoided parties, casual meetings, any situation that might awaken the demons she felt dormant within her. But there was one classmate, Sarah, who insisted on breaking through her defenses with an almost maternal patience. "You'll rot in this town if you don't get out of this bubble," Sarah would say whenever they met in the library. "There's a graduation party in Chicago next weekend. Several classmates from the course will be there. You need to live a little, Emma. Your mother wouldn't want you locked away like this." The mention of her mother always disturbed Emma's thoughts. How could Sarah talk about the woman she had never known? But there was something in her classmates' insistence that touched an old wound. Perhaps it was time to test the limits of the armor she had built around herself. On the eve of the trip, Emma locked herself in her room and contemplated the dress Sarah had lent her, a tight black fabric that ended well above the knees and left her shoulders exposed. Just looking at the garment made her heart race. When she dressed in front of the bedroom's foggy mirror, she barely recognized her own image. The subtle makeup Sarah had taught her to apply transformed her brown eyes into something deeper, more mysterious. Her loose hair framed a face she had always considered ordinary, but which now seemed to carry a dormant sensuality. "My God," she whispered to the mirror, touching her own lips with her fingertips. "What am I doing?" The question echoed in the empty room, unanswered. But deep down, Emma knew she had already passed the point of no return. Curiosity was stronger than fear, the desire for freedom more intense than guilt. She packed a change of conservative clothes in her bag, like an anchor to the safe world to which she could return, and left for Chicago, carrying in her chest the feeling that this trip would change her life forever. During the 5-hour bus ride, she watched the Georgia landscape gradually transform into the urban immensity of Chicago. The mountains gave way to buildings, the silence of the countryside to the deafening noise of the metropolis. And with each mile she moved away from home, Emma felt as if she were leaving behind not just a place, but an entire version of herself. When she arrived at the address Sarah had indicated, a luxurious apartment in the Gold Coast, her heart was already beating to a different rhythm. The music pulsed through the walls like a giant heart, and Emma could feel the vibration of the sound in her own bones. Beautiful, Well-dressed people circulated through the rooms, laughing loudly, drinking from crystal glasses, touching each other with a naturalness that she both envied and feared. It was a completely different world from hers, a world where purity didn't seem to be a virtue, where bodies met without ceremony, where gazes were direct and loaded with promises she couldn't decipher. Emma stood at the entrance for a few minutes, observing that strange universe, when a blonde girl with blue eyes approached with a warm smile. "You must be Emma that Sarah has talked so much about," said the blonde girl, extending a glass of rosé champagne with bubbles dancing like tiny diamonds. "I'm Ashley. Sarah had to take care of something at work, but she asked me to look after you." Emma accepted the glass with trembling hands, fascinated by the delicacy of the crystal and the golden liquid that reflected the colored lights of the party. She had never drunk alcohol in her life, but something in Ashley's warm presence made her relax. The girl had an almost ethereal beauty, with platinum hair that fell in soft waves over her bare shoulders, and perfect skin that seemed to glow under the strobe lights. "First time in Chicago?" asked Ashley, coming close enough for Emma to smell the sweet, musky perfume emanating from her skin. "It must be frightening to leave a small town and face all this." Emma nodded, bringing the glass to her lips. The champagne went down her throat like a liquid caress, leaving a bittersweet taste in her mouth and a warm sensation in her stomach. It was different from anything she had ever experienced, a sensation that seemed to awaken nerve endings she didn't know existed. "It's all very intense," admitted Emma, watching the couples dancing close together in the center of the room, bodies moving in a hypnotic rhythm that made her own blood pulse faster. "I don't know if I belong in a place like this." Ashley laughed, a melodious sound that mingled with the electronic music invading every corner of the apartment. "Nobody belongs anywhere until they try, honey. You're much prettier than you think. That dress is perfect on you." Ashley's words echoed in Emma's mind like a balm for old insecurities. No one had ever spoken about her beauty in such a direct, uninhibited way. In the town where she grew up, compliments always came with moral caveats, as if physical beauty were something dangerous that needed to be tamed. As the night progressed, Emma gradually felt more at ease. The music seemed to penetrate her bones, making her move her hips in an instinctive way she had never experienced before. The alcohol ran through her veins like a river of liquid courage, breaking down the barriers she had built over the years. Ashley remained nearby, always attentive, refilling her glass whenever it emptied, introducing her to other people, making her laugh at jokes she would never have found funny in a sober state. "You're loosening up," observed Ashley, during one of the many times she filled Emma's glass. "It's beautiful to see. Your family must be very strict for you to have remained so contained for so long." Emma nodded vaguely, her mind already clouded by alcohol. The party lights seemed brighter, the sounds more intense, the sensations more vivid. She found herself laughing loudly, touching strangers' arms during conversations, allowing men to invite her to dance. It was as if a completely different version of herself had emerged from the depths of her soul, a version she didn't know existed. "My mother always said that everyone has two people living inside them," Emma heard herself say, the words coming out slurred and emotional. "The person the world expects us to be and the person we really are. I think I'm meeting the second one." Ashley smiled, but there was something strange in her blue eyes, an intensity that Emma couldn't decipher through the alcoholic fog. "And how does it feel to meet her?" Emma closed her eyes for a moment, trying to organize her thoughts. Scared, excited, guilty, free. She laughed, a sound that seemed almost hysterical. "It's contradictory, I know." "It's not contradictory," said Ashley, coming even closer. "It's human." It was then that Emma noticed her vision was becoming blurry in a way that wasn't just related to the alcohol. The colors seemed to blend together, the faces around became blurred stains, and a strange sensation of displacement took over her body. She tried to focus on Ashley's face, but even the girl's contours seemed to undulate like a mirage. I think I drank too much," murmured Emma, putting her hand to her forehead. The world was slowly spinning around her, and she felt her legs weaken. Ashley held her by the arm, her touch firm and reassuring. "Come with me. I'll take you to a quieter place where you can recover." Emma allowed herself to be guided through the crowd, but her feet didn't seem to touch the ground properly. The voices around became a distant murmur, and she had the strange sensation of observing the scene from outside her own body. She vaguely remembered climbing stairs, passing through a dark corridor, a door being opened. "Where are we going?" she managed to ask, but her own voice sounded distant to her ears. "To a safe place," replied Ashley, and there was something in the tone of her voice that made a distant alarm go off in Emma's foggy mind. "Someone special wants to meet you." The last images Emma could form were fragmented like shards of a broken mirror, a dark room, the profile of a tall man standing by the window, amber eyes that shone in the half-light like those of a nocturnal predator, and a deep voice saying something she couldn't fully comprehend but which sounded like, "Finally." After that, only darkness. A deep, dreamless sleep that completely engulfed her, taking with it the last vestiges of the virgin, repressed girl from Cedar Springs. When Emma would awaken, it would be in a completely different world, in the arms of a man who knew her secrets before she even knew she had them. The awakening came gradually, as if Emma were emerging from the depths of a dark ocean. First, the awareness of her own body returned in waves. The sensation of soft sheets against her skin, the weight of a luxurious comforter, the subtle smell of French lavender impregnated in the fabric. Then came the sounds, the distant murmur of urban traffic, the almost imperceptible hum of air conditioning, and closer, the rhythmic sound of breathing that wasn't her own. When she finally managed to open her eyes, Emma found herself in an environment that seemed to have come straight out of the pages of a decoration magazine. The room was immense, with high ceilings and large windows that framed the Chicago skyline like a work of art. The furniture was dark wood with elegant lines, and every detail breathed a discreet but unmistakable luxury. There was nothing there that resembled the simple, austere world from which she came. But what really made her heart stop was the imposing presence of the man sitting in the armchair beside the bed. He was tall, even sitting. This was evident from the way his long legs stretched out relaxedly. His black hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had repeatedly run his hands through it, and his stubble gave a wild air to a face that would otherwise be considered aristocratic. But it was his eyes that disturbed her most, amber like dark honey, intense and penetrating, studying every micro-expression on her face as if deciphering a complex code. "You're awake," he said, his deep, velvety voice carrying an accent that Emma couldn't completely identify. There was something foreign there, but shaped by years of living in America. "How do you feel?" Emma tried to sit up, but a sudden dizziness made her reconsider. She put her hand to her head, trying to organize the fragmented memories of the previous night. The party, Ashley, the champagne, the strange sensation of displacement, and then nothing. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice hoarse and strangely vulnerable. "What happened to me?" The man leaned slightly forward, his forearms resting on his knees in a posture that managed to be both relaxed and predatory. "My name is Ethan Morgan. You're in my apartment, in the Gold Coast. As for what happened," he paused, as if carefully weighing his words, "I found you unconscious outside the party, near an emergency staircase. You were alone and clearly under the influence of some substance." His words created more questions than answers in Emma's confused mind. She remembered being with Ashley, climbing stairs, a door opening. How had she ended up outside? And why had this man, this complete stranger, taken her to his home instead of to a hospital? "You brought me here," she said, more as a statement than a question. "Why? Why didn't you take me to a hospital? Why didn't you call the police?" Ethan smiled, but it wasn't a reassuring smile. There was something dangerously sharp about it, like the edge of a blade hidden beneath velvet. "You were wearing that dress, completely vulnerable in a poorly lit area of the party. If I had left you there or taken you to a public hospital in that state, well, let's say your safety and reputation would have run unnecessary risks." Emma pulled the comforter further up her body, suddenly conscious that she was wearing only a man's t-shirt that smelled of his woody perfume. The fabric was soft and expensive, probably Egyptian cotton, and covered her body to the middle of her thighs. "My clothes," she began, panic starting to form in her chest. "They're being washed," interrupted Ethan, with a calmness that was somehow more disturbing than any agitation would have been. "You had vomited. I asked my housekeeper to take care of it. She was also the one who dressed you and put you to bed. I didn't touch you inappropriately." There was something in the way he said "inappropriately" that made the hair on the back of Emma's neck stand up, as if there was a very thin line between appropriate and inappropriate, and he knew exactly where that line was drawn. "I need to leave," she said, trying to sit up again. This time she succeeded, although the room spun slightly around her. "I need to go home." "To Cedar Springs," said Ethan, and the fact that he knew where she came from made Emma freeze completely. "How do you know where I live?" Ethan rose from the armchair in a fluid movement and walked to the window, his hands tucked into the pockets of his dark dress pants. His white shirt was open at the first 2 buttons, revealing a line of his muscular chest and a gold chain that disappeared under the fabric. "There were documents in your purse," he said without turning around. "ID, driver's license, basic information. I needed to check your identity to ensure you didn't have any medical conditions that could complicate your situation." It was a logical explanation, rational even, but something in his tone of voice, in the way he avoided looking at her directly while speaking, made Emma feel there were layers of truth he wasn't revealing. "You said you found me unconscious," she insisted, "but I remember being with a girl, Ashley. She was taking care of me." Ethan finally turned around and the expression on his face was unreadable. "There was no one with you when I found you. You were completely alone." Emma felt a strange sensation spreading through her chest, as if something important was slipping through her fingers. The memories of the previous night seemed covered by a thick fog, and the more she tried to grasp them, the more they dissolved. "I want to see my phone," she said. "I need to call Sarah, my family. They must be worried." Ethan walked to an elegant dresser and picked up an iPhone that Emma recognized as hers. When he handed it to her, his fingers brushed against hers for an instant, and Emma felt an electric current run up her arm. It was a completely new sensation, intense and disturbing at the same time. "Your battery was dead," he said. "I left it charging overnight." Emma took the phone with trembling hands and saw it was 2 in the afternoon on a Sunday. There were several missed calls from Sarah and a voice message that she listened to with a racing heart. "Emma, I hope you're okay. Ashley told me you weren't feeling very well and that you went home early. Call me when you can. I'm worried." Emma looked at Ethan with a confused expression. "Ashley told Sarah that I went home early." "Perhaps she didn't want to worry your friend," suggested Ethan, but there was something evasive in his response. Emma felt like a piece of a puzzle whose edges didn't fit quite right. There were gaps in her memory, inconsistencies in the explanations, and a growing sensation that she was being wrapped in a web much more complex than she could understand. In the days that followed, Emma found herself a prisoner of a luxury she had never imagined existed. Ethan insisted that she stay until she had completely recovered, and for some reason she herself couldn't understand. She accepted. Perhaps it was the fear of what she would find when she returned home, or perhaps it was the morbid curiosity about this enigmatic man who treated her with an almost medieval courtesy, but who carried in his eyes an intensity that made her feel naked, even when fully clothed. His apartment was a world apart. It occupied the top floor of a luxury building, with a stunning view of the city that changed color as the hours passed. Each room was a masterpiece of design, with pieces of art that Emma suspected were worth more than the house where she grew up. But what impressed her most was Ethan's personal library, an entire room with shelves that went from floor to ceiling, filled with books in various languages: philosophy, psychology, classic literature, art history. It was there that she spent most of her time, losing herself among the pages while trying to decipher the man who had collected them. Ethan left early every morning, always impeccably dressed in suits that seemed to have been specifically cut for his body. Emma discovered that he owned an international chain of boutique hotels, heir to a family empire that spanned 3 continents. But when he returned at night, he transformed into something completely different. He exchanged the suits for casual clothes that highlighted his masculine beauty in an almost disturbing way, prepared elaborate dinners with his own hands, and watched her eat as if each of her movements were a revelation. "You cook better than any chef," commented Emma one night, savoring a risotto with porcini mushrooms that melted in her mouth. They were sitting on the apartment's terrace, under a starry sky that competed with the city lights. "I learned when I lived in Milan," said Ethan, pouring more wine into her glass. It was always wine, never champagne, as if he instinctively knew that the memory of golden bubbles disturbed her. Italian cuisine is an art form. Each dish tells a story. Emma took a sip of the wine, savoring the complexity of flavors that unfolded on her palate. "And what story does this risotto tell?" Ethan observed her for a long moment, his amber eyes reflecting the candles he had lit on the table. "The story of someone who waited his entire life to find the right person to share a meal with." His words created a warmth in Emma's chest that had nothing to do with the wine. It had been weeks since she had been there, and each day the sexual tension between them intensified. There were glances that lasted longer than they should, casual touches that left her skin on fire, conversations that walked dangerously close to intimate territories. But Ethan never crossed an invisible line, always maintaining a respectful distance that both reassured and frustrated her. "Ethan," she said, setting the glass on the table, "why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" "Taking care of me. Allowing me to stay here. Treating me as if—" She stopped, searching for the right words. "As if I were special." He remained silent for so long that Emma thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was deeper, laden with an emotion he usually kept under control. "Because you are special, Emma, more than you imagine." "But you barely know me." "I know enough," he said, rising abruptly from the table. "I know enough to know that you don't belong in that world you came from. I know enough to know that you're running from something just as much as I am." Emma felt her heart quicken. "What are you running from?" Ethan walked to the terrace railing, resting his hands on the cold metal. "From myself. From what I'm capable of doing when I want something very intensely." His words sent a shiver down Emma's spine. There was something in the way he said them, with a brutal honesty that was both attractive and terrifying. "And what do you want?" she asked, getting up and walking until she stood beside him. Ethan turned to face her, and Emma saw something wild shining in the depths of his amber eyes. "You know what I want." The air between them seemed to electrify. Emma felt pulled toward him like an irresistible tide, every cell in her body screaming for her to eliminate the distance between them. But when she raised her hand to touch his face, Ethan stepped back. "No," he said, his voice tense. "Not like this. Not while you don't know who I really am." The rejection was like a slap. Emma felt her cheeks burn with humiliation and frustrated desire. "Then tell me who you are." "You're not ready for that. Stop deciding what I am or am not ready for," she exploded, all the accumulated tension finally finding an escape valve. "You brought me to your home. You keep me here like a doll in a showcase. You treat me as if I were made of crystal. But at the same time, you look at me as if you wanted to devour me. What game is this, Ethan?" He took a step toward her, and for the first time Emma saw a crack in the controlled facade he always maintained. "You want to know what game this is? Well, I'll tell you." Ethan walked to a desk in the corner of the room and picked up a leather folder. When he returned, he extended it to Emma with an expression that mixed challenge and remorse. "Open it." Emma took the folder with trembling hands. Inside were photos, documents, newspaper clippings. As she leafed through the contents, she felt the blood freeze in her veins. They were young women, all beautiful, all with an expression of vulnerability in their eyes. Some photos seemed to have been taken from a distance, others were closer, more intimate. And at the end of the folder, a photo that made her world collapse. Herself, leaving the university in Cedar Springs with a red circle around her face and a date from 2 years ago. "My God," she whispered, the photos escaping from her hands and scattering on the floor. "You knew me. You stalked me." Ethan didn't deny it. He just stood there, watching her crumble, with an expression that was both guilty and defiant. "For 2 years," he said, with a terrible calmness. "I saw you for the first time in an online broadcast of a lecture on religious morality and mental health that you gave at the university. There was something about you, a purity, a light that I had never seen in anyone. I tried to forget, tried to convince myself it was just a passing obsession, but I couldn't." Emma felt nausea rising in her throat. "You set everything up." "The party, Ashley, it was all planned." "Ashley works for me," admitted Ethan, "but the party wasn't set up. I found out you would be there through your friend Sarah's social media. I saw an opportunity to finally meet you in person." "You drugged me?" accused Emma, her voice trembling with anger and betrayal. "You had Ashley drug me." "No," said Ethan, and for the first time there was a genuine inflection of emotion in his voice. "That was never part of the plan. Ashley acted on her own, thinking she was helping me. When I found out what she had done, I almost killed her." Emma looked at him with horror. "Almost killed her? What kind of monster are you?" Ethan smiled, but it was the saddest smile Emma had ever seen. The kind of monster who falls in love with angels and tries to keep them pure, even knowing he'll end up corrupting them in the process. Emma spent the night locked in the guest room, refusing to come out or talk to Ethan. But the anger that initially consumed her was gradually giving way to something more disturbing, a morbid curiosity about her own reaction. Why hadn't she run away? Why, even knowing that he had stalked her for 2 years, did a part of her feel flattered? The discovery of this dark facet of herself terrified her more than anything Ethan could have done. The next morning, she found a complete breakfast waiting on the kitchen table, along with a handwritten note in an elegant script. "I know you hate me right now. I know you have every right to hate me. But before you leave, you need to know the whole truth. E." Emma ate in silence, savoring French croissants and Colombian coffee that probably cost more than she spent on food in an entire month. When Ethan appeared, already dressed for work, but with an exhausted expression that suggested he hadn't slept, she faced him with a coldness she didn't know she possessed. "You said I needed to know the whole truth," she said, her voice as sharp as ice. "So speak." Ethan sat at the table, maintaining a respectful distance. "The other women in the photos, they were all like you, young, vulnerable, trapped in situations that suffocated them. I saved them. I took them out of abusive relationships, toxic families, situations of extreme poverty. I offered them new identities, new beginnings, resources to rebuild their lives." Emma felt a bitter laugh escape her lips. "Like a savior. How convenient." "I don't expect you to believe me," said Ethan, his eyes fixed on the coffee cup between his hands. "But it's the truth. I have a foundation that officially doesn't exist, that operates at the limits of legality to help women in desperate situations. Some of the women in those photos today have university degrees, solid careers, families of their own. Others—" he stopped, his jaw tensing. "Others what?" "Others couldn't handle the freedom I offered them. The transition from a controlled life to a life of unlimited choices can be destructive for some people. Some developed addictions, psychological disorders. Some simply disappeared." Emma felt a chill in her stomach. "Ashley?" "Ashley was one of them, a girl I saved from an abusive home at 16. I gave her education, medical care, a new life. But she became obsessed with me. She developed an unhealthy emotional dependence. When she found out about my interest in you, she saw an opportunity to impress me. Where is she now?" Ethan's silence was more eloquent than any answer. Emma felt the blood freeze in her veins. "You killed her." "No, but I couldn't save her from herself. She's in a private psychiatric clinic in Switzerland, catatonic for 6 months. Emma rose abruptly from the table, walking to the window to hide the tremor that took over her hands. The city stretched before her like a sea of possibilities and dangers, and she felt lost between the two. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked without turning around. "Because you're not like the others." "How can you be sure?" Ethan stood up and walked until he was behind her, close enough for her to feel the heat of his body, but without touching her. "Because you're questioning everything. The others accepted my help without asking questions, too grateful to be critical. You're challenging me, forcing me to confront what I am. This is new to me." Emma turned to face him and saw something she didn't expect in his amber eyes. Genuine vulnerability. It was as if he had taken off a mask, revealing underneath a man who was as lost as she was. "What do you want from me, Ethan? Honestly." "I want you to choose," he said, his voice hoarse. "I don't want to save you against your will, as I did with the others. I don't want you to accept my protection out of gratitude or fear. I want you to look at who I am, including the darkest aspects, and choose to stay because you want to be here. And if I choose to leave, then I'll let you go. I'll provide resources for you to have complete financial independence if you want. I'll disappear from your life completely." Emma studied him, looking for signs of lying or manipulation, but there was something in the way he looked at her, a brutal honesty that was both terrifying and seductive. "I need time to think." "As much time as you need." That afternoon, Emma decided to leave the apartment for the first time since she had arrived. Ethan didn't try to stop her, just gave her a credit card and the number of a private driver. "For your safety," he said, and Emma didn't argue. Chicago received her like a sensory avalanche. After weeks in the controlled environment of Ethan's apartment, the busy streets, the noise, the smells, everything seemed amplified. She walked along the magnificent mile, observing elegant women who seemed to have been born for that world of luxury, and wondered if she could one day become one of them. It was in a bookstore in Lincoln Park that she found what she was looking for without knowing she was looking for it. Among the psychology books, her hands found a volume on Stockholm Syndrome and traumatic bonds. As she read, sitting in a nearby cafe, Emma began to question her own feelings. What she felt for Ethan, was it love or a psychological response to the situation of vulnerability? Was it genuine attraction or the result of being isolated from the outside world? But as she analyzed each moment they had shared, each conversation, each glance loaded with sexual tension, Emma came to a disturbing conclusion. Even knowing everything she knew now, even understanding the dark aspects of Ethan's personality, she still felt attracted to him. More than that, she felt alive in a way she had never experienced. When she returned to the apartment at nightfall, she found Ethan on the terrace, standing in the same place where they had had their confrontation the night before. He didn't turn around when she approached, but Emma knew he was aware of her presence by the tension in his shoulders. "I found something interesting today," she said, placing the book on Stockholm Syndrome on the center table. Ethan finally turned around, his gaze immediately going to the book. An indecipherably sad expression crossed his face. "And what conclusions did you reach?" he asked. "That you might be right about me not being like the others," said Emma, walking until she was close enough to smell his woody perfume. "Because even after knowing all this, even understanding that I should be terrified and running away from you, I can't." "Emma." "No," she interrupted him, placing a finger on his lips. The touch sent an electric current through both of them. "My turn to speak. You said you want me to choose, so I'm choosing, but with one condition." Ethan covered her hand with his, pressing it against his face. "Anything. No more secrets, no more half-truths. If I'm going to surrender to this, I need to know exactly what I'm getting into. Even if the truth might hurt you." Emma smiled, and it was a smile that carried a darkness she didn't know she possessed. "Ethan, I grew up in a house where truth was sin and lies were virtue. I think I've been hurt enough by ignorance. It's time to discover what truth can teach me." The truth came in layers, like an onion being peeled. Ethan began with the origin of his fortune, not just inherited, but built on a network of businesses that operated at the limits of legality. Money laundering through hotels, influence peddling, blackmail of corrupt politicians. He didn't present himself as a good man who had made bad choices, but as someone who had consciously embraced his dark nature to survive in an equally dark world. "My father was a criminal," he said one night when they were lying on the living room couch, her head resting on his lap while his fingers played distractedly with her hair. "Not a romantic criminal, like in the movies. He was brutal, calculating, cruel. He taught me that the world is divided between predators and prey, and that the only real choice we have is which of the two we want to be." Emma listened in silence, absorbing every word. It had been weeks that they had been living in a growing intimacy, not sexual but emotional. Ethan touched her constantly, a caress on her face, fingers intertwined while they watched movies, hands on her hips when he passed behind her to get something in the kitchen. They were chaste touches, but loaded with an electric tension that made the air between them vibrate. "And you chose to be a predator," she said, not as a judgment, but as a statement. "I chose to survive," he corrected. "But when I began to save women like you, I realized that perhaps I could use my predatory nature for something less destructive." Emma turned on his lap, studying his face in the half-light of the room, illuminated only by the city lights. "Did you save them or collect them?" The question hit something deep in him. Emma saw his jaw tense, his amber eyes darken. "In the beginning, I genuinely believed I was saving them. But over time, I began to realize there was a pattern. They all had something I recognized in myself, a corrupted purity, a lost innocence. I think I was trying to save them because I couldn't save myself. And with me? What's different with me?" Ethan brushed a strand of hair from her face, the delicate touch contrasting with the intensity of his gaze. "With you, I don't want to save. I want to corrupt. I want to be the first and only one to touch places in you that no one has ever touched. I want to see you discover pleasures you can't even imagine exist. I want to be your ruin and your redemption at the same time." His words sent a wave of heat through Emma's body that went straight to places she barely knew existed. In recent days, Her body had begun to awaken in ways that frightened and fascinated her. Erotic dreams where Ethan's hands explored every inch of her skin, waking up wet and breathless, an insistent pulsation between her legs whenever he looked at her in a certain way. "Show me," she whispered, her voice hoarse with desire and nervousness. Ethan froze. "Emma, you said you want to be the first to touch me. So be it." For a long moment, they looked at each other in silence. Emma could see the internal struggle reflected in his eyes. Desire versus self-control, need versus protection. When he finally moved, it was with a deliberate slowness that made each second stretch like an eternity. He kissed her first on the forehead, then on the closed eyelids, on the cheeks, on the contour of the jaw. They were soft, reverent kisses, as if she were made of something precious that could break under too much pressure. When he finally reached her lips, it was just a touch, light as the flutter of a butterfly's wings. Emma moaned softly, a hand closing on his shirt. "More?" she asked against his lips. Ethan's control broke like a bursting dam. He kissed her hungrily, with years of repressed desire, with a passion that made Emma feel as if she were drowning in the sensation itself. His hands lost themselves in her hair, pulling her closer, as if it were possible to fuse them into a single body. When they separated to breathe, both were panting. Emma could feel his heart beating rapidly against his chest, a rhythm that mirrored her own. "I can't stop," he admitted, his voice deep and tense. "If we start, I won't be able to stop." Emma smiled, a smile that carried all the dormant sensuality that was finally awakening. "Who said I want you to stop?" In the weeks that followed, Emma discovered a world of pleasures she had never imagined. Ethan touched her like an artist working on his masterpiece, mapping every erogenous zone, learning exactly how to make her moan, how to make her beg, how to take her to the edge of pleasure without ever letting her fall, but always stopping before the final consummation. "Why?" she asked one morning, frustrated and breathless after another session that had left her on the brink of climax without allowing her to get there. "Because when I finally possess you completely," he said, his lips against her neck. "I want it to be because you chose to give me not just your body but your soul. I want it to be a complete surrender, without reservations, without regrets." It was a form of exquisite torture, and Emma began to understand that it was part of a much more complex game. Ethan wasn't just awakening her sexuality, he was molding it, conditioning it, preparing her for something she still didn't fully comprehend. It was during one of these sessions that Emma made a disturbing discovery. Looking for a glass of water in the kitchen after a particularly intense afternoon, she noticed that one of the drawers in the counter was ajar. Inside, she found a collection of objects that made her blood freeze. Photos of her sleeping, locks of hair, the underwear she had worn on the first night, and that she thought had been lost in the laundry. When she confronted Ethan, he didn't deny it. "I need pieces of you," he said with brutal honesty. "When you're not here, when I feel I could lose you, they remind me that you're real, that this is real. This is sick obsession, Ethan." "Yes," he agreed without hesitation. "It's obsession. It's sick. It's everything you want to call it. But it's also love. A love that isn't healthy, that isn't normal, that will probably destroy us both. But it's the only kind of love I know how to offer." Emma found herself at a point of no return. She knew she should be horrified, that she should run away. But instead she felt a dark excitement running through her veins. There was something deeply disturbing and at the same time seductive about being desired with such intensity, about being the center of someone's universe in this absolute way. "Show me," she said, surprising them both. "Show me how you love me when I'm sleeping." Ethan studied her for a long moment, looking for signs that she was testing him or manipulating him. When he found nothing but genuine and disturbing curiosity, he smiled, a smile that was both tender and predatory. "Are you sure you want to see how deep my obsession goes?" Emma nodded, and at that moment she knew she had crossed a line from which she might never be able to return. Ethan took her to a room in the apartment she had never seen, a private office behind the library, accessible only through a door disguised among the bookshelves. Emma felt her heart quicken when he typed a complex code into the electronic lock, his fingers moving with the precision of someone who had done it hundreds of times. What she found on the other side of the door was simultaneously terrifying and fascinating. The walls were covered with photos of her, images captured from that first lecture 2 years ago to intimate moments of the last few months. Emma, walking through the university, leaving home, sleeping in his room, reading in the library. There were hundreds of them, organized chronologically like an obsessive timeline of her life. "My God," she whispered, walking slowly through the room. "You documented everything." "Every moment I could capture," admitted Ethan, watching her absorb the extent of his obsession. "In the beginning, they were just a few photos from a distance, but after you came here, I couldn't stop. You're so beautiful when you sleep, so vulnerable, and at the same time so strong. I needed to preserve those moments." Emma stopped in front of a particularly intimate photo, herself asleep in his bed, lips parted, a hand extended as if reaching for something in a dream. The image captured an unconscious sensuality that made her blush. "Did you touch me while I slept?" "Only hair, face. Never anything inappropriate. I wanted the first time I touched your body to be when you were awake, conscious, desiring." Emma turned to face him, and Ethan saw something he didn't expect in her brown eyes. Excitement, not horror, not disgust, but a dark fascination that mirrored his own. "This should scare me," she said, walking toward him. "It should make me run away, but I can't stop thinking about how it must have been. You watching me, desiring me, controlling yourself not to touch me." Ethan swallowed hard. "Emma, show me," she said, her hands resting on his chest. "Show me exactly what you did when you watched me sleeping." What followed was an erotic game that pushed both of them into unexplored emotional territories. Emma lay on the bed, pretending to sleep, while Ethan reproduced his nightly rituals. He touched her with an almost religious reverence, whispering confessions he had never said out loud about how she made him feel, about the dreams he had about her, about the way her presence had completely transformed his existence. "You are my redemption," he murmured against her ear, believing she was asleep. "My last chance to be something beyond the monster I've become. If I lose you, there's nothing left in me worth saving." Emma struggled to keep her breathing regular, to not reveal that she was hearing every word. There was a raw vulnerability in his voice that touched her in a deep and disturbing way. In the days that followed, Emma found herself in a downward spiral of fascination with her own darkness. She began to deliberately provoke Ethan, testing the limits of his self-control. She walked around the apartment in increasingly revealing clothes, subtly touched herself while pretending to read in the library, moaned softly during the night to see him struggle against the impulse to go to her room. "You're playing with fire," he warned one morning, his eyes dark with frustrated desire. "Maybe I want to burn," she replied, licking her lips purposefully while drinking coffee. The tension between them became almost unbearable. Emma felt like a violin string stretched to the maximum, ready to break at any moment. It was then that she decided to take the next step in her investigation into Ethan's past. Taking advantage of his absence for a business meeting, Emma explored more deeply the files in the secret office. It was there that she found the medical folders of the other women he had saved. The reports gave her psychology reading a terrifying dimension: personality disorders, emotional dependency syndrome, psychotic breaks, suicide attempts. But it was in a specific folder that Emma made the discovery that would change everything. Documents about a private psychiatric clinic in upstate New York, of which Ethan was the main investor. And there, among the medical records, she found names she recognized from the photos. 5 of the women he had saved were interned there. That afternoon, Emma lied to Ethan, saying she was going to meet an old college classmate. Instead, she took a taxi to the clinic, located in a rural area 2 hours from Chicago. The place looked more like a luxury resort than a psychiatric hospital. Impeccable gardens, elegant architecture, a superficial tranquility that hid dark secrets. Using Ethan's surname and claiming to be his fiancée, Emma gained access to the facilities. She was guided by a solicitous nurse through white, silent corridors until they reached a reserved area where the special patients were kept. The first woman she saw made her instinctively back away. She was a young woman of perhaps 25, sitting in a rocking chair, staring blankly at nothing. When the nurse mentioned Ethan's name, the woman reacted violently. "Is he coming today?" she asked, her eyes lighting up with a sick hope. "I behaved well. I didn't scream during the night. Can I go home with him?" "She was a model," explained the nurse in a low voice as they moved away. "Ethan brought her here 3 years ago. Severe psychotic break after a suicide attempt. She developed an extreme obsession with him. Emma visited 2 other patients, and the pattern was the same. Young, beautiful women, all with histories of trauma, all obsessed with Ethan, all believing he would come back for them. It was the last patient who revealed the most disturbing truth. A young woman named Sophia, admitted just 6 months ago, still lucid enough to maintain a coherent conversation. "You're the new one, aren't you?" said Sophia when Emma approached. "I can see it in your eyes. You still have that glow, that innocence he so loves to corrupt. How do you know about me?" "Because I used to be you," said Sophia with a bitter laugh. "The virgin princess he saved, the pure little doll he molded to his taste, until I realized I wasn't special, that I was just one more in a long line of broken toys." Emma felt her blood freeze. "What happened to you? What happens to all of us? He loves us intensely until we become obsessed with him. Then, when we can't stand living only for his love anymore, when we try to have a life of our own, well, then we discover there are consequences for trying to leave Ethan Morgan." Sophia pointed to her own scars on her wrists. 3 suicide attempts after discovering he was already watching my replacement. "Do you know a girl named Ashley?" The name hit Emma like a punch to the stomach. "You knew Ashley? She was my best friend here, until she decided she could win Ethan back by bringing you to him. Poor Ashley. She really thought he would be grateful." "Where is she now?" Sophia's smile was terrible. "North Wing, catatonic section. Want to see her?" Emma knew she should refuse, that she had already seen too much, but the need to fully understand what she had gotten herself into was stronger. She followed Sophia through increasingly silent corridors, until they reached a wing where the air seemed thick with despair. Ashley was in a hospital bed, her blue eyes that had shone with life at that party now empty like frosted glass. Her body was motionless, but when Emma approached, Ashley's lips moved in an obsessive repetition of the same phrase. "You are the last. You are the last. You are the last." Emma left the clinic trembling, not with fear, but with something more complex and disturbing. As the taxi took her back to Chicago, she wondered what the difference was between her and the other women. Why didn't she feel horror at what she had discovered? Why, instead of planning an escape, was she planning a confrontation? The answer came when she looked at herself in the taxi's mirror and saw in her own eyes the same obsessive glow she had recognized in the other women. She wasn't different from them. She was just next in line. But, unlike the others, Emma decided she wouldn't be a passive victim of her own obsession. If she was going to become a monster, it would be a monster by her own choice. Emma returned to the apartment with a mental clarity she hadn't felt in months. She found Ethan in the office, working on the computer, his shoulders tense with worry. When she appeared at the door, he looked up, and she saw relief flood his amber eyes. "I thought you had left," he said, getting up from the chair. "When I came back and you weren't here." "I went to visit your other women," interrupted Emma, her voice calm like the surface of a lake before a storm. Ethan froze completely. For a long moment, they looked at each other in silence, and Emma could see his brain processing the implications of what she had said. Fear, guilt, despair, and resignation passed across his features like clouds on a somber afternoon. "The clinic," he said finally, not as a question. "The clinic. I saw Sophia, Mariana, the others. I saw Ashley." "Emma, I can explain." "You don't need to," she said, walking slowly toward him. "I understood everything perfectly. The pattern, the cycle, the inevitable ending. The difference is that, unlike the others, I'm not going to try to run away." The confusion in Ethan's eyes was genuine. "You're not." Emma stopped right in front of him, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "No. Because I discovered something about myself today that changed everything." "What?" "That I am as obsessed with you as you are with me. The difference is that the others fought against it, tried to maintain their sanity, their individuality. I decided to embrace the madness." Emma saw the impact of her words in his eyes, saw the exact moment when fear transformed into something much more dangerous. Hope. "You don't know what you're saying," he murmured. "I know exactly what I'm saying. Those women went mad because they tried to be 2 people at the same time. The woman they were before knowing you, and the woman they became after. I'm not going to make that mistake. I choose to be entirely yours." Emma took his hands and placed them on her neck, maintaining eye contact. "Possess me completely, Ethan. Body, mind, soul. Make me what you want, but don't abandon me when I become exactly what you created. Ethan's breathing became irregular. Emma, you don't understand the consequences of what you're asking. I understand better than the others understood. They thought they could keep a part of themselves separate from you. I know that's impossible, so I'm offering everything voluntarily. Emma began to unbutton her own blouse, her fingers moving slowly, deliberately. You said you wanted to be my ruin and my redemption. So be it. Now. Completely. When the blouse fell to the floor, Ethan saw that she wasn't wearing a bra. Her breasts, small and perfect, rose and fell with her accelerated breathing. Her pale skin seemed to glow in the golden light of the office, and Ethan felt the last thread of self-control breaking. Once we start this, he said, his voice hoarse, there will be no going back. You will be mine completely. Forever. This includes the darkest aspects of what I am. Show me, challenged Emma, her eyes shining with an intensity that rivaled his own. Show me exactly what kind of monster you are. What happened next was a dance of domination and submission that lasted for hours. Ethan possessed her with an intensity that was simultaneously tender and brutal, mapping every inch of her skin with his hands, mouth, teeth. He made her beg, moan, cry with pleasure and pain, pushing her beyond all the limits she thought she had. When he finally penetrated her, Emma screamed. Not just from physical pain, but from a fundamental transformation that was happening in the deepest part of her being. She felt her virginity being taken not just physically, but symbolically, as if Ethan were literally taking possession of her soul. Mine, he murmured against her ear, moving inside her with a possessiveness that made her shiver. Completely mine. Yours, agreed Emma, her nails digging into his back. Forever yours. In the weeks that followed, Emma transformed in ways that surprised her. The repressed girl from Cedar Springs had given way to a woman who embraced her darkest desires without hesitation. She became an active accomplice in Ethan's obsession, helping him photograph her, participating in increasingly intense erotic games, allowing him to mold her exactly according to his fantasy. But unlike the other women, Emma maintained her lucidity. She understood what was happening, completely accepted it, and even more disturbingly, began to reciprocate the obsession. She also began to collect him. Photos of him sleeping, personal objects, secret recordings of his work phone conversations. You're not going crazy, observed Ethan one night, studying her with fascination as she organized her own relics of him in a box. No, I'm evolving. Into what? Emma smiled, and it was a smile that would have frightened the girl she had been months ago. Into your equal, someone capable of loving you in the sick way you need to be loved, without breaking in the process. It was then that Emma discovered the final file on Ethan's computer, videos from the night of the party. Her breathing stopped when she saw the images on the screen. There she was, but not as a passive victim being manipulated. The security cameras captured everything. Emma approaching Ethan on her own, whispering something in his ear, kissing him desperately, begging him to take her away from there. I remember, she whispered, the memories finally returning with crystalline clarity. I saw you standing alone on the balcony, and something in me recognized something in you. I knew you were dangerous, but I also knew you were exactly what I needed to free myself. Ethan nodded slowly. You chose this from the first moment. Ashley only facilitated what you already wanted to do. That's why the others went mad and I didn't, understood Emma. They were brought against their will or manipulated into coming. I chose you consciously, even without fully understanding what I was choosing. And now, knowing everything, do you still choose this? Emma turned to face him, and Ethan saw in her eyes the same dark obsession that burned in his own. Now, I choose to be your partner, not your victim. I want to help you close that cycle of broken women. I want to be the last, not because you're going to abandon me or destroy me, but because you finally found someone capable of returning your madness with the same intensity. Ethan pulled her into a kiss that was pure possession. You know, this means you can never leave me, right? That you can never have a normal life, normal relationships, nothing that isn't this? Who said I want a normal life? Replied Emma, biting his lower lip until she tasted blood. Normality is overrated. Mutual obsession is much more interesting. That night, they made love with an intensity that transcended the physical. It was a fusion of equally damaged souls, equally hungry for a connection that not even death could break. When they finally collapsed, exhausted and satisfied, Emma knew she had found her place in the world, not as the pure woman she had been raised to be, but as the dark half of a love that society would consider sick, but which for them was the only form of love that made sense. 6 months later, Emma had become an elegant and dangerous shadow at Ethan's side. She had learned his business, become his confidant in matters that could destroy careers and lives. More than that, she had become his active accomplice. When he needed to seduce information from a corrupt businessman during a business dinner, it was Emma who distracted the wife with seemingly innocent conversations about charity. When he needed someone to deliver compromising documents, it was Emma who went, with her angelic face that no one would suspect of anything. The transformation was complete, but conscious. Emma hadn't lost her identity. She had chosen to completely redefine it. She wore expensive clothes that Ethan chose for her, frequented places he frequented, read books he recommended. But she did all this because she wanted to, because each of her choices had become an extension of the obsessive love they felt for each other. "Don't you miss your old life?" he asked one morning, as she dressed to accompany him to an important meeting. They had just made love with an intensity that left red marks on her pale skin, marks that she would wear as trophies under the conservative dress she would wear in public. "What life?" replied Emma, adjusting the diamond necklace he had given her. "That suffocating existence in Cedar Springs, virginity as a prison, the empty prayers and repression disguised as virtue? No, Ethan, this is my real life. That was just preparation." They had gone to Cedar Springs only once, so Emma could officially break with the past. The conversation with Pastor Robert had been brutal. Her father saw her enter the family home transformed. Her hair longer and silkier, her skin glowing with health and sexual satisfaction, clothes that cost more than he earned in a year, and immediately knew he had lost his daughter to something he couldn't understand. "You sold your soul," he had accused, his hands trembling as he held the Bible like a shield. "I didn't sell it," corrected Emma, her voice calm and firm. "I offered it freely to someone who valued it more than any God ever did." She had cleaned out her room, taking only her mother's diaries. It was all she wanted from that life. The rest could burn. Back in Chicago, Emma discovered that Ethan had closed the psychiatric clinic. The women had been transferred to a quality public institution, with their medical bills paid indefinitely. Ashley remained in a catatonic state, but in a place where she would be well cared for. "Why did you do that?" asked Emma. "Because I don't need it anymore," said Ethan simply. "It was a monument to my own pathology. With you, I don't need monuments. I have the real thing." Emma understood that this was, in its twisted way, a declaration of love. Ethan was closing the cycle of broken women because he had found someone who wouldn't break, someone who would become as obsessive as he was, creating a perfect and disturbing balance. It was on a December night, during a charity gala at the Plaza Hotel in New York City, that Emma had the opportunity to fully test her new nature. Ethan needed information about a politician who was being investigated for money laundering, information that could save some of his more questionable businesses. The target was a married man, known for his weakness for young, beautiful women. "Are you sure you want to do this?" asked Ethan as she got ready in the hotel room. The dress was a blood-red Valentino that embraced every curve of her body like a second skin. "I'm sure," replied Emma, applying a lipstick the same color as the dress. "But I want you to watch." The seduction game that followed was a dark work of art. Emma flirted with the politician with a skill that surprised even Ethan. She laughed at the man's unfunny jokes, touched his arm at the right moments, allowed him to guide her to a private balcony with a view of Central Park. And all the time, she knew that Ethan was watching her every move through the hotel's security cameras, which he had hacked hours before. When the politician tried to kiss her, Emma allowed it for a few seconds before gently pulling away, whispering that they needed to be more discreet. It was then that she planted the listening device on his suit lapel, her skilled fingers working while she pretended to fix his tie. "You were perfect," said Ethan when she returned to the room, his eyes dark with desire and something deeper, pride. "I was thinking of you the whole time," confessed Emma, as he pressed her against the door, "about how you would be reacting, about how it would excite you to see another man desiring me, but knowing that I am completely yours." The sex that followed was explosive. Fueled by the adrenaline of the successful operation, and the mutual excitement of the game they had played. Emma discovered that she liked the power, the manipulation, the way she could make powerful men dance to her tune, but she liked even more returning to Ethan's arms, surrendering completely to the only man who knew her inside and out. "We're perfect together," she murmured against his sweaty chest, as their breathing returned to normal. "Dangerously perfect," agreed Ethan, his fingers playing with her hair. In the months that followed, Emma and Ethan became an urban legend in Chicago's social circles, the mysterious magnate and his enigmatic companion who appeared together at exclusive events like two elegant predators hunting in harmony. There were rumors about them, some true, others fanciful, but everyone agreed on one thing. There was something intensely disturbing and at the same time magnetic about the couple. Emma learned to use her beauty and intelligence as weapons. Ethan taught her about business, politics, power. She taught him about conscious vulnerability, about how to embrace his own darkness without being consumed by it. Together they created a dark kingdom where only they understood the rules. But it was on a March night, almost a year after they had met, that Emma made the discovery that would definitely test the strength of their relationship. She was organizing Ethan's files when she found a folder marked with her own name. Inside, a collection of documents that made her breathing stop. Her mother's birth certificate, medical records, psychiatric reports. Her mother hadn't died from an illness, as she had always been told. She had committed suicide after being admitted to a psychiatric clinic, and the name of the main investor in that clinic was familiar, Morgan Industries. "You knew," said Emma when Ethan returned home that night, the folder open on the dining table like a silent accusation. Ethan didn't try to deny it. "Yes. My mother was one of your saved women, wasn't she?" "Not directly. She was a patient at a clinic my father financed in the 90s. When I first saw you, I recognized the surname, researched the connection." Emma felt something breaking inside her chest, but it wasn't her heart. It was the last barrier between her and the complete acceptance of her own darkness. "So you chose me also because of her, because you wanted to correct the mistakes of the past." "In the beginning, yes," admitted Ethan. "But Emma, you have to understand." "I understand perfectly," she interrupted, a strange smile curving her lips. "You have a fixation with women damaged by men in your family. It's almost poetic." Ethan studied her, looking for signs of collapse, of anger, of betrayal. Instead, he saw something that surprised him, complete acceptance. "This doesn't change anything for you?" he asked, incredulous. Emma approached him, her hands resting on his chest. "It changes everything and changes nothing. Now I understand why we recognized each other at that party. It wasn't a coincidence. It was destiny. A twisted, dark destiny, but destiny nonetheless." She kissed him with a passion that tasted of blood and dangerous promises. "We are made for each other, Ethan. Literally created by the same destructive forces. If that isn't true love, I don't know what is." 2 years later, Emma was standing on the balcony of the penthouse she now called home, watching the sunset tinge Chicago in golden and crimson tones. Her fingers played distractedly with the engagement ring Ethan had given her, a rare Colombian emerald, dark as their shared secrets, surrounded by diamonds that captured the light like crystallized tears. The marriage proposal had happened during a trip to Paris, in a private suite in the Eiffel Tower that Ethan had rented for an entire night. It wasn't romantic in the traditional sense. It was intense, loaded with the same obsession that defined every aspect of their relationship. He didn't kneel. Instead, he pressed her against the window overlooking the city of lights, and whispered in her ear all the dark ways he intended to love her for the rest of her life. "I accept," she had whispered back, "but only if you promise never to try to protect me from who you really are." The wedding would be in 2 weeks, in an intimate ceremony in a private chapel in Aspen. Only a few selected guests, people who understood the special nature of their love without asking inconvenient questions. Pastor Robert wouldn't be present. Emma had completely cut ties with her father after he tried to save her by sending a group of religious people to exorcise the demons he believed had taken possession of his daughter. "What are you thinking about?" asked Ethan, approaching from behind and wrapping his arms around her waist. He had just come out of the shower, and Emma could feel the moisture still clinging to his skin, the smell of the French soap he used mixed with his natural scent. "About how we got here," she said, relaxing against his solid body. "About all the choices we made, or the boundaries we crossed. Regrets? Emma laughed, a sound that carried echoes of the woman she had been and promises of the woman she was becoming. None, but sometimes I wonder what people would think if they knew the whole truth about us. That we're monsters, said Ethan without hesitation. That our love is sick, obsessive, dangerous. And would they be right? Completely, he admitted, kissing her neck in a way that sent shivers up her spine. But they don't understand that some monsters were made to love each other, that our darkness fits perfectly. Emma turned in his arms, studying the face she knew better than her own, the fine lines around his amber eyes, the almost imperceptible scar on his chin, the result of a teenage fight, the way his lips curved when he smiled just for her. It was a face that could easily belong to a conventional, successful, and respectable man. But Emma knew the secrets that hid behind that facade. "Ethan," she said, her hands resting on his chest, "I need to tell you something." Something in the tone of her voice made his muscles tense. "What?" "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was loaded with an intensity that Emma could almost touch. She watched the emotions pass over Ethan's face like waves. Shock, fear, possessiveness, and finally a fierce tenderness that made his eyes shine. "Are you sure?" 3 different tests, 2 weeks late. And yesterday, when you were touching me, I felt a sensitivity I've never felt before. Ethan picked her up in a fluid movement, spinning her in the air before pressing her against the balcony wall. When he kissed her, it was with a passion that tasted of future and eternal promises. "Our child," he murmured against her lips, "our little monster." Emma laughed, the tears she didn't know she was holding finally rolling down her cheeks. "Do you think we'll be good parents?" "We'll be the parents our children will need," said Ethan, with a conviction that admitted no doubts. "We'll raise them to be strong, intelligent, capable of surviving in any world. We'll love them unconditionally, but we'll never lie about who we are. And if they inherit our intensity, then we'll teach them to use that intensity constructively, to channel obsession into productive passions, to transform darkness into strength." Emma nodded, knowing that Ethan was right. They had learned to embrace their dark nature without being destroyed by it. They could teach a child to do the same. In the weeks that followed, as they planned the wedding and prepared for parenthood, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The virgin, repressed girl from Cedar Springs had died at that party in Chicago. In her place, a woman had been born who had completely embraced her own darkness, who had found in obsessive love a form of transcendence. The wedding was exactly as Emma had imagined, small, intense, loaded with meanings that only they fully understood. When they exchanged the vows they had written personally, each word was a promise of absolute loyalty, of unconditional love, of eternal complicity. "I promise to be your accomplice in all crimes of the heart," said Emma, her eyes fixed on his. "I promise never to try to change your essence, but to grow with it. I promise to love your shadows as much as your light." "I promise to protect our darkness as I protect your light," responded Ethan. "I promise never to hide from you who I really am. I promise that our mutual obsession will always be greater than any force that tries to separate us." When they kissed to seal the union, Emma knew she had found her place in the world. It wasn't the life that any normal person would choose, but it was perfect for who they had become. 6 months later, Emma gave birth to a girl with amber eyes like her father and the fierce determination of her mother. They called her Hope, not for the Christian virtue, but because she represented the hope that love, even in its darkest forms, could create something beautiful. "She will be free," said Emma, cradling her newborn daughter while Ethan watched with an expression of absolute adoration. "Free to choose her own kind of love, her own way of existing in the world." "She will be loved," added Ethan, gently touching the baby's cheek. "Not loved despite who she is, but because of who she is, exactly like us." Emma smiled, knowing they had broken the cycle. Her daughter would grow up knowing the truth about her parents, about the world, about the choices one can make when one has the courage to embrace one's own nature. She would grow up strong, conscious, capable of loving intensely without losing herself in the process. "We're a family now," she said, looking at the man who had been her ruin and her salvation. "A family of beautiful monsters. The best monsters the world has ever seen," agreed Ethan, embracing wife and daughter, in a hug that was simultaneously protective and possessive. Outside, Chicago continued its frenetic dance of lights and shadows. Millions of people living conventional, safe, predictable lives. But there in that penthouse that had become their sanctuary, Emma knew she had found something infinitely more precious. A love that transcended conventions, that transformed darkness into light, that proved that sometimes the happiest endings come from the most unlikely stories. The repressed girl from Cedar Springs had become a complete woman in Chicago. Physical virginity had been only the first veil to fall. Then came the veils of hypocrisy, denial, fear of being who she really was. In the end, what remained was the pure truth. She and Ethan were soulmates in the most literal sense of the expression. Two halves of a dark and beautiful whole that only together made complete sense. And when Hope grew up, she would understand that true love isn't always gentle, isn't always safe, isn't always approved by society. Sometimes true love is fierce, obsessive, transformative. Sometimes true love requires us to become better versions of our worst impulses. Emma looked out the window one last time, watching the city lights turn on one by one in the growing darkness. Somewhere out there, other lost souls were searching for their own form of redemption. And perhaps with luck they would find what she had found, someone capable of loving their shadows as much as their light. After all, everyone deserves to be loved exactly as they are, even monsters, especially monsters,